All right, guys, so we have an absolutely insane update here on what is probably one of the most depraved stories that I've ever covered on this channel, where about a year ago, we had leaked footage from this notorious Israeli prison, which is really functioning more so as a torture camp for Palestinians, where you can see Israeli soldiers grabbing a Palestinian detainee, pushing him up against the wall, and then you see fellow soldiers with what looked to be some form of like a riot shield, putting them up to block the view of the security cameras as they tortured this man directly behind, including brutal and horrific sexual torture and abuse. So this video came out, and around the same time that there was talk or there was a whiff of potential accountability for these soldiers, you had riots that broke out in Israel where they were banging on the doors, on the walls of this prison, calling for these soldiers to be freed, right? This was a riot in no uncertain terms in defense of IDF soldiers' ability to rape Palestinian detainees. That's what this was. And this included many high-level Israeli politicians, including guys like you're probably familiar with if you watch my channel, Itamar Ben-Gvir, Bezalel Smotrich, the national security and the finance minister, respectively, who were defending these soldiers. In fact, Smotrich said that they should be viewed as heroes, not as criminals, not as villains, but as heroes. The quote here from Al Jazeera's article last year was, "Everything is legitimate. Israeli leaders defend soldiers accused of rape." And so now, fast forward to what's unfolded over the last couple of days, we get this update. Because apparently, the person who leaked that initial footage that we just watched was Israel's top military lawyer, who has since been forced to resign. She's been stripped of all of her military credentials. She's been arrested inside of Israel for leaking this footage of Israeli crimes. So a little bit on that here from Dropsite. They say Major General Yifat Tomer Yerushalmi, Israel's top military lawyer, resigned on Friday after admitting that she approved the leak of a surveillance video that showed Israeli soldiers at Sde Teiman prison gang raping a Palestinian detainee who was held without charge, which is very common for Palestinians held by Israel. And this took place over the course of about 15 minutes. In her letter that she released, she said that she authorized the leak to, quote, push back against false propaganda, suggesting the army was shielding war criminals. She said her intent was to defend the credibility of the military justice system, but conceded that the move violated confidentiality law. So understand that the reason that she is giving for why she released this footage, according to this quote here, is essentially because Israel has been facing incredible amounts of pressure internationally and from international organizations like the International Criminal Court, who want to look into Israeli war crimes committed against Palestinians. And she's saying basically, I released this footage and was pushing for some level of accountability because I want to protect Israel from that international pressure. Right? Because the logic goes that if we can prove to them, at least give the image that we're able to hold our own accountable for their crimes, then nobody's going to come breathing down our neck or asking questions about these crimes and whether or not anybody's being held accountable. So she wasn't doing this out of like humanitarian concerns for the man who was brutally sexually abused by these soldiers. She was doing it to protect Israel, essentially, was her logic. Now, we also had word that she had basically written a death note, essentially, to her families, bidding them farewell, saying, take care of yourself. And then she disappeared after that until she was later found and then again was arrested inside of Israel. So, I mean, incredible amounts of pressure that was put on her from Israeli society, from the highest upper echelons of Israeli politics, attacking her, trying to ruin her life to the point where she wrote what looks to be sort of like a farewell letter, if you understand the implications of that. Now, keep in mind, again, this is not somebody who was doing this out of any sort of like humanitarian concern for the treatment of Palestinians who are in Israeli detention. In fact, this is the same person, this major general, who was the legal chief who avoided probes into Gaza war crimes. They say here from Haaretz, an Israeli outlet, that after resigning last week over the Sde Teiman affair leak, the IDF legal chief, senior sources told Haaretz, used various pretexts to avoid opening or advancing investigations into numerous IDF abuses in Gaza, including the Army's March 2025 killing of 15 medical personnel and a 2024 airstrike that killed 7 World Central Kitchen volunteers. So again, this is somebody who has been spending years helping to cover up Israeli war crimes, right? And she felt in this one specific situation, it was advantageous because you had high-level Israeli politicians who were rioting at this prison to free these soldiers, that she felt that it was necessary for her to release that video. Now, we also have some comments here from wanted fugitive war criminal Benjamin Netanyahu, who decided to weigh in. He said, the rape of the Israeli soldiers of the Palestinian prisoners in Sde Teiman caused enormous damage to the image of the state of Israel and the Israeli army and our soldiers. This may be the most difficult propaganda attack that the state of Israel has faced since its establishment. I do not recall an incident centered with this degree of force. This requires an independent investigation, not affiliated with any party, and I expect such an investigation to be conducted. Now, he's not calling for an investigation into the soldiers who committed this crime. He's calling for a full investigation into the person who leaked the video to the media. And again, look at the language that he's using to describe this. He says it's a difficult propaganda attack that Israel has faced. It's not that your soldiers committed a heinous crime. It was revealed to the world and everybody said, that's fucked up. That's not the case. He's saying it's a propaganda attack against us, right? As if it's somehow like an unfair smear against the IDF or the Israeli state that this video got released. No, the crime happened. And by the way, it's systemic within Israeli prisons, this kind of torture and abuse of Palestinians. So again, it's not a propaganda attack. It's not a damage to your psyche. It's something that your soldiers did, right? And then your ministers in your government rioted to make sure that there was no accountability for it. So if there's international pressure, against Israel condemning this kind of behavior, that's totally valid, right? That's not a Hezbollah, failure or whatever else the case may be. That's just reality. I mean, just amazing, the kind of statements. Even here from the Israeli so-called opposition, right? So here we have the opposition leader, Yair Lapid, who considers himself a liberal and a leftist, which honestly does not exist within Israel in terms of, an accurate political spectrum of Israeli politics. But this guy, apparent liberal and leftist, he praised the dismissal of this major general on the grounds that she tarnished the reputation of the Israeli army and weakened its confidence in itself and the community's confidence in it, while nobody in the highest levels of Israeli politics spoke about the crime itself. So again, he's basically echoing the same thing that Netanyahu was just saying. He's saying, you've attacked our soldiers, right? You've weakened their confidence. You've weakened the public's confidence in the IDF. And again, it's like, yeah, confidence should be weakened when this is the kind of standard operating procedure that the IDF is working with. But again, that's the framing that they're going with. We also, at the same time, have some of these soldiers who participated in this attack going on Israeli media channels and effectively bragging about it. I mean, in this one clip where they were doing a press conference with what I believe are their lawyers here, they were proudly declaring, "We will prevail," as they're appearing in like black masks on mainstream news channels. There were some others who have sort of become celebrities of sorts inside of Israel after this event took place. I mean, this is the kind of society that we're looking at here, where people like this who commit that kind of attack, they're caught on camera doing it, that not only did they not face accountability, but they're being praised. They're being defended by broad swaths of the Israeli political system, by broad swaths of the Israeli public. I mean, it's utterly insane to watch. Now, another little breakdown here from Al Jazeera. Noir did a good job on this, so I want to go ahead and watch a little bit of this video, just giving some more of the context and surrounding quotes from people like Benjamin Netanyahu.
The Israeli military's legal chief is in prison and the subject of a legal and political storm. At issue is this leaked video of Israeli soldiers raping a Palestinian detainee from Gaza in the notorious Sde Teiman military base. In her resignation letter on Friday, Major General Yifat Tomer Yerushalmi admits she leaked this video to the media in August 2024 to defend the Israeli army's law enforcement authorities. The Israeli Prime Minister and his coalition partners responded with fury, stripping Yerushalmi of her military ranks and accusing her of spreading blood libel against the Israeli army.
What happened at Sde Teiman base caused tremendous damage to Israel's image and that of the Israeli Defense Forces and soldiers. It's perhaps the most serious propaganda attack the State of Israel has faced since its establishment.
The investigation into the leak is sidestepping the actual rape and other crimes that are happening in Israeli prisons like this one. The UN's Independent Commission of Inquiry says Israel's gender-based and sexual violence against Palestinian detainees is widespread and systematic.
Benjamin Netanyahu is saying that it is blood libel for her to release this video of an attack that objectively did happen. He's saying that's a blood libel propaganda attack against the state of Israel. Now, more on what she was referencing there in terms of this being a systematic issue inside of Israel. Here from Dropsite News, the UN Commission of Inquiry found that, quote, forced public stripping and nudity, sexual harassment, including threats of rape as well as sexual assault, are standard operating procedure of Israeli forces towards Palestinians, and that other forms of sexual and gender-based violence, including rape and violence to the genitals, were committed either under explicit orders or with implicit encouragement by Israel's top civilian and military leadership. They concluded that the frequency, prevalence, and severity of sexual and gender-based crimes perpetrated across the occupied Palestinian territory led the commission to conclude that sexual and gender-based violence is increasingly used as a method of war by Israel to destabilize, dominate, oppress, and destroy the Palestinian people. So that was the UN Commission of Inquiry, again, saying that this kind of abuse is not some one-off, some bad apples or criminals or whatever, but it is the standard operating procedure that they say is either oftentimes on explicit orders from higher-ups or at least with implicit encouragement by top leaders inside of Israel. Now, a couple more things here. As a reminder, I've mentioned this in previous videos, but some of the bodies, many of them have been held at facilities like Sde Teiman. They've been returned to Gaza as part of this quote-unquote ceasefire deal that Israel has violated over 100 times so far. But some of these bodies that have been returned to Gaza show signs of torture and execution, according to Palestinian doctors. They say almost all of them had been blindfolded and had gunshot wounds between the eyes. So again, standard operating procedure, torture, sexual abuse, and execution of Palestinians in their facilities. Now, it gets even worse somehow because although there have been many Palestinians who have been killed, who have died while in Israeli custody, showing widespread signs of torture and abuse, they're now essentially making this more official. So here from Mustafa Barghouti, he says, the approval by the Israeli Knesset Security Committee of the law to execute Palestinian prisoners expresses the dangerous fascist content of the Israeli system and enshrines the brutal racist apartheid regime against the Palestinian people. He says the international community, including Arab and Muslim and Islamic worlds as a whole, is required to confront the rise of fascism and its laws. So they are effectively codifying the ability for them to execute Palestinian prisoners. And keep in mind, many of these people who are held in these facilities, these Palestinians, they're held without trial, they're held without charges, they're not given any sort of semblance of due process, and many of them go through military courts, which have about a 99% conviction rate. And now they're talking about adding on top of that, not only the brutal conditions that they're subjected to in these facilities, but just straight up execution of these Palestinians. I mean, it doesn't get more criminal and rogue state behavior like than this. Now, final thing here, because again, the fascist Minister of National Security, Itamar Ben-Gvir, is doubling down on all of this. So here we have bound and tortured Palestinian hostages being held inside of Israel. And here goes Ben-Gvir saying, do you see them? This is how they are now, but one thing remains to be done, and that is to execute them. And you can see him standing here in front of a line of presumably Palestinians face down on the ground, zip-tied hands behind their back as he is calling to execute them. So this is our vaunted, celebrated ally in Israel, right? The only democracy in the Middle East, who many U.S. politicians say shares common values with the United States of America. So just ask yourselves, right? We should be asking ourselves, is this the kind of country that we want to share common values with, that we want to give billions of dollars in taxpayer money, that we want to send weapons to be able to carry out these kinds of crimes, that we want to run cover for on the international stage, to give them protection from any sort of accountability from the rest of the world. This is the country that we want to tie ourselves to the hip at. I mean, ask yourself that question. I'm sure many of the people watching my channel already, have a strong stance on that, but it's utterly deranged that we pretend that this is a normal country. No, this is a totally rogue, fascist, apartheid state that we're looking at here. That's in the midst of not only continuing with their genocide in Gaza, their ethnic cleansing in the West Bank, but also things like this, right? That often don't get covered, even as little as, the genocide itself and some of the stories in the West Bank already don't get enough coverage. But it's stuff like this that is never mentioned in the mainstream media here, right? Think about the kind of the level of coverage that the New York Times Screams Without Word piece, that was one of the worst pieces of so-called journalism in modern history, the coverage surrounding the allegations of mass sexual assault on October 7th. Think about the widespread coverage that those claims, many of them, again, debunked and refuted, that got in U.S. media. And in the meantime, you have stuff like this happening in the background in Israel with official approval sanctioned by high-level, members of the Israeli government, and there's not a word. There's not a single word from U.S. politicians, from the U.S. media. I mean, it's absolutely pathetic and utterly deranged. So there's your update. Not only was there, this horrifying abuse that happened to this Palestinian man that was caught on video, not only did they riot in defense of the soldiers who carried out that attack, but then now we have Israel punishing the person who released the video, not punishing the soldiers, but punishing the person who released that video and arresting her and stripping her of her military credentials. So again, this is the country that we want to be best friends and allies with, a country that thinks it's more scandalous to release the video of a war crime than it is to commit the war crime in the first place.
Politic guy has the best politic. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying